NACDL is the association of the nation's criminal defense bar.
First of all, I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am Vanessa Antone. I am Senior Resource Counsel for the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. And a few housekeeping matters before we get into it. This webinar is being recorded so that it can have reach well beyond those of you who are able to join us live today. So if you have coworkers or colleagues who weren't able to join us live, shortly afterwards, we will be able to send you all a link to circulate to your contacts and other groups. During the program or at the end of the program, when we have some time left for Q&A, we can take your questions. In this large of a webinar setting, we won't be doing that verbally from people to chime in, but we ask that you submit them either through the Q&A function in Zoom or the chat function to the panelists, and we will be monitoring that and pull questions, and you'll have an opportunity to have those answered by our panelists at the end of the program. In addition, the other housekeeping matters we have, you should all be muted. If you are having any difficulties during the program, technically, go ahead and submit those through the chat function, and NACDL staff will seek to address those with you. So having dispensed with those housekeeping matters for now, I would just like to say we are pleased to welcome you to this series. It is Looking Forward, Modern Strategies for Prosecution and Defense. And this is a series of webinars that NACDL is presenting along with co-sponsor, the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. And we are pleased to have partnered with them on many projects and to have them with us here today. And also, these webinars and some of our other work with APA and other organizations in this area of prosecution and defense working together is supported by a grant from the Bureau of Justice Assistance. And while they support our work through funding and through this grant, I will also note that they do not support or endorse any of the statements or opinions put forth in this webinar or any of the other work. So they haven't, modified or approved the content, but we are happy to receive this funding as they work to help prevent and correct wrongful conviction. So without further ado, today's panel is developing and implementing changes in prosecution. The panel following this one at 3 p.m. will be progressive prosecution. Challenges and opportunities for the defense. So we will look a little more at the defense side. And then you all can join us if you would like tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. for a panel that looks at both of these perspectives from a community angle. So we have some community groups joining us tomorrow at 6 p.m. I cannot give an introduction that would do any of our panelists justice, and since we are already delayed a little bit, I will keep it rather short, and you can see everyone's full bio on the NACDL website. But first of all, I would like to welcome Nicole Parisi of APA, who is here as our moderator today. So thank you, Nicole. She is general counsel for APA, has a background in criminal law before going to APA, and in her work there has collaborated with us on many projects, and we are happy to have her. She certainly has a wealth of expertise in this area, and we know you're going to be a great moderator guiding us. We also have here Mark Dupree, who's the district attorney in Wyandotte, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, so I apologize, county in Kansas, and that is the 4th largest county in the state. He has been working on implementing strategic changes and policies like those that we are focusing on today, and looking to have equitable charging and prosecution policies and practices. So welcome, Mark. We also have Stephanie Morales. Stephanie Morales is the first woman to be elected Commonwealth's attorney in Portsmouth, Virginia. She immediately started creating some sustainable prosecution models aimed at producing safe models for safe and just procedural practices in prosecution. After that, she was embraced by the community and was reelected and has a lot of practices she's going to share with us today. So Stephanie Morales will also be part of the community panel on Thursday. So we thank you for that as well. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our moderator and our panelists to talk a little bit about their work and kick it off. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you to NACDL for facilitating this and putting this panel together. It's a very important topic, and I think having a group of prosecutors who have led progressive reforms is really important for the audience to hear. For those who are unaware, APA was created about 11 years ago as a nonprofit whose mission is to support and enhance the effectiveness of prosecutors in their mission to create safer communities. We advocate on behalf of prosecutors on emerging issues related to administration of justice. We've had the privilege of working with both Stephanie and Mark on our APA projects and have had them included in our advisory councils and different working groups. And so I can say with experience that the audience will definitely benefit from hearing about their expertise and experience in this field. So I know no one wants to hear more from me. Let's hear from the experts. Let's start with Stephanie. I think let's just hear a little bit more about you, how you got to where you are, and a little bit more about your office.
Thank you. So happy to be here with everybody remotely. You know, my experience is such that I am proudly serving the community where I was born and raised. And so I've always had a very deep connection to the people in my community, which in 2015, when there was no quote unquote progressive prosecutor movement, when I first got elected, I had to think long and hard about what type of prosecutor I wanted to be. And I determined very early on that that term prosecutor wasn't what was resonating with me, but the ability to be a public servant for the community that I was a daughter for. So it, you know, caused me to think kind of about everything holistically, from working with young people, looking into food insecurity issues and things that lead to that school to prison pipeline, all the way to, you know, involving them in the office and trying to create future leadership with our young people, all the way through those who have been incarcerated, going into prisons and working with them consistently to try to create better outcomes and everything in between. And so thinking about, you know, the job of a prosecutor and conviction integrity, and going back and looking at how we correct wrongs of the past, one very important thing that I constantly think about is how on a daily basis to keep everybody in my office in the fight to make sure that we are not harming people right now. And I could go on forever about, you know, all the different things that I think, but you know, the spirit of respecting time and giving opportunity for everybody to talk, I'll just say that, you know, our profession has not done enough acknowledgement of the harm that we constantly are perpetuating. And so I try to, you know, every single day remind myself of that to make sure that I'm not patting myself on the back and not allowing my attorneys to pat themselves on the back for trying to look back and correct the wrongs of the past if we don't acknowledge that there is great propensity to continue to do harm going forward every single day. So with that, I'll stop and just say that I'm, you know, very much looking forward to discussing the great work that everybody is doing and how we can continue to be better.
Thank you, Stephanie. And so Mark, can we please hear a little bit about how you came to be and a little bit more about your office?
So, yes, I'm Mark Dupree, and Vanessa, you did say it correctly, Wyandotte County, also known as the DOT for short. So, job well done there.
Thank you.
So, like Stephanie, I was born and raised here in my county, love the DOT, and I grew up in the inner city. And quick story, it wasn't until I got to law school that I found out that the location that I grew up in was labeled as a high crime area. And so I was sitting in my criminal law area and I found out that apparently my neighborhood was high crime. And so it really brought a little clarity to what I believe the criminal justice system believed about my specific neighborhood and, quite frankly, the folks that I grew up with in my community. And so for me, growing up as a pastor's kid, known as the preacher boy, my focus was to try to do whatever I could do, right, to bring peace and harmony to my community while sprinkling a little bit of Pentecostal preaching in there. And at 14, I ran into a judge who happened to be an African-American judge. And that was the first time I had ever met a lawyer of any kind, but more importantly, one that looked like me. And that exposure to a judge who was an African-American in my community in the inner city showed me that I had the opportunity to be a part of the criminal justice system without being a defendant in the criminal justice system. And before that moment, that's all I knew about the criminal justice system was the negative aspect concerning it. And so that really changed the trajectory of what I wanted to do in life. And ultimately, I joined in and went to law school and became a prosecutor and an intern in the very office that I now lead. What I did when I got here was I honed in on the many things and concerns that I saw when I was growing up. And one of the major things was that we had people in our community who didn't know what the prosecutor's role was, who didn't understand that the prosecutor's job was to serve the community. It was not to make the community fearful. It was not to make certain sectors of people afraid of police or the criminal justice system, but it was to make sure that every member in our community felt safe. It was about public safety. And so one of the first things that we did when we got in was create the community liaison board and begin to communicate with the folks who are actually in the community. I am a firm believer that in order to fix the problem, we must work with the people who are closest to the problem, which are the community people. And so we now have many organizations who we collaborate with. We go into the communities, go into the schools. We have mentoring programs. We're bringing the organizations to us to sit and talk about things that many times prosecutors think we know, but oftentimes it's not until we sit down with those folks in the community who actually are living this life, who can tell us what the real problems are, who the real problems are, and how to deal with them. And so that's one of the biggest things that we did is really make our prosecutor's office a community's prosecutor's office, which then assisted us in really focusing in on protecting all victims of all races and all genders.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for all that. And so to really start this panel about progressive prosecutors, I think let's step back and define what progressive means to you. And do you agree with that label? Do you think other terms should be used? And how do you feel about being labeled a progressive prosecutor? So I'll stick with Mark to start off this question.
You know, I think progressive is a good term. I like the term holistic. I mean, because progressive can mean multiple different things. If we're moving forward from some of the mistakes of the past, then sure, let's stick with progressive. But I think we have to have the thought process of looking at the criminal justice system and prosecution in a holistic way. From all perspectives and trying to figure out what is the best route to deal with what we are focusing in on, right? Are all of the victims being cared for, or just some of the victims? Are we looking at all of the cases in a way that is positive and progressive, or are we only talking to certain ones? One of the issues that we dealt with when I came in was certain victims were not spoke to at all in our district, specifically until they had a trial. And so our focus changed from, okay, let's get out of the traditional way of doing things and let's begin to focus in on how it will positively affect every victim that comes into play, which means that making sure that you're not treating victims as defendants, right? And sometimes that was a big issue and a big deal. And so I think progressive label is good, but I also think that some prosecutors take that label and actually do nothing to change anything. And so we have to be careful to make sure that prosecutors are really making change and making forward progress and looking in a holistic way on what is causing the crime as well as how to prevent the crime.
And Stephanie, how do you feel about the term progressive?
So I have to step into like my other role here, where I'm not just the elected Commonwealth attorney here, but I sit on the board, the national board of the Local Progress Organization, which is an organization of over 1,000 local elected officials who identify as progressive. And so, I got a hit with the lexical definition of progressivism, and supposedly, according to Wikipedia, that means a progressive movement to support the interests of ordinary people. If that's what a progressive prosecutor is, I love it. But I don't know what the term progressive prosecutor means anymore, because so many people have co-opted that term because it sounds good. It represents reform. It represents transformation. And if a person is truly acting in that manner and they are acknowledging the harms that have been done, they're acknowledging the systemic racism, the institutional injustice, and that is leading their work, I'm all for it. But the problem is that, having that title, it allows people to use that title and not necessarily embrace those ideologies. And so if communities are not paying attention, if, we as members of the profession are not holding ourselves accountable to live up to that title, in the way that it's defined lexically, and if it is, if we are in fact not doing the things that are associated with representing the ordinary person who does not have power, who does not have a voice, who is actually in need of a representative at the table for them, then, that term doesn't carry any weight. So that's what it's lexically defined as, according to Wikipedia. That's what I try to embody. Try to acknowledge that we need complete transformation and overhaul of the system as we know it, into something that will actually represent and seek out the needs of everybody who does not have the power that we hold at the elected level. So it's tricky, but it's time for communities and law members of the legal profession and everybody else to find these people who are identifying as progressive and not living up to it. And, maybe then we can have a further conversation about whether that is a term that we need to be using, or whether we actually have to speak in terms of the transformation that we seek, and actually show through our actions what we are, as opposed to putting a label on ourselves.
And so the next question can be for either of you or both of you, as being labeled progressive prosecutors and being in a small group throughout the nation that's labeled a progressive prosecutor, at least in the beginning. Why do you think prosecutors are often not associated with progressive change?
Look at the system. I mean, let's just, I don't know how to do anything other than have a direct, straightforward dialogue. Incremental change has failed us. And, any change that prosecutors have traditionally agreed to has been incremental, if at all. And state associations are known for going to lobby the legislature and interfere with any types of change that, that transpire. Some prosecutors lean on the inability to move forward because of judicial systems and other players who don't want to act. And the bottom line is people just become very uncomfortable with having disagreement and not being liked. And I've seen a lot of that just professionally. I've seen people who, we have to have this conversation about intentionality. There's a lot of dialogue around, we didn't know the system did this, or the system is not working. No, the system is working exactly how it was designed to work. And I think a lot of people actually intend for it to work the way that it is. And so we just don't have a lot of people who have the desire to have the change that many of us who are deemed progressive prosecutors actually seek. And so I think that's why there aren't a lot of people who are associated as progressive prosecutors, because they don't want to be. I mean, and that's it. Some of us get it. Some of us want to act in that way and our actions reflect that. Others just don't. And that's why it's time now to have these conversations about the reality and the results of those who want to keep the status quo, and who enjoy being the typical law and order prosecutors. So, I mean, it's just, it's time for frank discussions. And I think that's what we have not done enough of. And now at this time, in our society where we are, having an uprising and an awakening of sorts, we've got to have these real discussions about intentionality and the fact that some people are very intentional in their quest to keep the status quo as it is.
Ditto, ditto, ditto. I think the biggest thing I would say there is, if you are a real progressive, you will not be liked. You will be attacked. And you have to be able to find joy in knowing that you are doing something correct with the many attacked. Someone told me, Dupree, listen, if people are not jumping on you, you are not doing something correct. And so my response to that is, I must be doing a lot of stuff correct. And so, which means that there are a lot of people who really doesn't like being attacked. They don't like controversy. They don't like going against the grain. And let's face it, folks, as prosecutors, traditionally, we are the traditionalists. So we're the ones who really hold the line. Let's keep everything the same. And we're able to hide behind the legal procedures. I mean, in what other system can you keep an individual who has not committed a crime, who is completely innocent, in prison for all of their life because they did not file a certain document within a certain time frame? How is this possible, right? But this is what we're able to do as prosecutors because it's the law. And we can say, well, this is just the way that it is. And so to go against that, you put yourself in a position where many people who are diehard protocol, this is the way it should be because the law says it, they tend to oppose you. And so many folks tend to back down, back away, and say, no, we're just going to leave it the same. And true progressives, true folks who are about justice for everyone says, forget the protocol, forget the way that things used to be or the way that you think it should be. Let's do what is the righteous thing and what is the purposeful thing, and focus on justice for everyone, despite if that means you're going to get your feelings hurt because someone doesn't invite you to a party that you didn't even know about in the first place.
Thank you both. And kind of towards that, so right now, distrust in the criminal justice system by the community is at an all-time high. That's with police, with prosecutors. I'm sure you guys feel it, even though you have implemented progressive policies within your office. Is there anything that you would want the public to know about being a prosecutor that isn't necessarily seen by your community? Do you think there are any misunderstandings?
Mark, you want to go first, or you want me to go? I don't want to keep hopping in there.
Listen, Stephanie, I yield the floor to you all day, okay? So please understand, I'm honored to be on the panel with you. Please.
And likewise. So let me just say this. The community doesn't trust law enforcement and prosecutors because law enforcement and prosecutors have not earned the trust of the community. And that is what, the reason why I do things the way I do them, because I know who I represent. I'm not elected to serve the police department. I'm not elected to serve the judges outside of them if they potentially, live in my community, but I'm elected to serve the entire community. That means the children who can't vote. That means anybody who's incarcerated who may not be able to vote, and everybody in between, all the members of the community. I see everybody as either a son, a daughter, a mother, a father, a son, a brother, whatever. That's how I see the people in my community. And for so long, the people in the criminal legal system have not seen the people in my community that way, and they've mistreated them. and there has been no accountability. And so I will share one of the first things that happened in 2015 was, a son of my city, his name was William Chapman II. He was killed by a police officer on duty. And, he was 18 years old, African-American, unarmed. I charged the officer. To make this long story short, prosecuted this case myself, did a year of pretrial motions, took it to trial, jury trial myself, and the members of my community showed up. We had a jury that was representative of the makeup of the community. We ended up with a voluntary manslaughter conviction. And that's accountability. Like Mark said, that was not easy. I was attacked. There was a lot of pushback from all different directions, but it was an effort not just to do, because once again, like, prosecutors know how to prosecute, but then they act like they're brain dead when it comes time to prosecute a member of law enforcement. So it wasn't the prosecution component. Yes, I wanted to make sure I did a good job of putting on the case, but it was also about showing the community that I will hold myself accountable to hold anybody accountable the way the members of the community are always held accountable. And that's been my frustration. It seems like we don't have a true system of justice. We have a system of accountability for some and not for other people who traditionally have the power. So, it's now a time for us to have these conversations. But my view is such that we have to fight for the community. We have to fight for those who don't have a voice. And that means that we have to hold ourselves accountable. And until we do hold ourselves accountable, that trust will not be there because we will not have earned it.
Thank you, Stephanie. And before we move on to Mark for that question, where do you think the first step is for prosecutors to take accountability? Practical steps.
So that's an easy one that I just, I gave that example. It wasn't, it was for a reason. It was because, of what we have going on in this country right now. There is a narrative that gets spread from time to time that, we can't get convictions. We can't hold law enforcement accountable. It's too hard. Qualified immunity. I'm a representation of the fact that that's not true. And feeding into that narrative is one that is actually harmful to communities because it creates an excuse. And so, implementing policies in my office, you don't have to implement a policy to hold police accountable. All of the officer involved shooting cases that come or in custody death cases that come, I personally review all of these cases to make a determination. And either you provide a report to the community or you indict. It's really that simple. And so that's a practice, not necessarily, something that I have to put in place, but it's just a practice, that we hold people accountable. Another thing is, I have certain procedural components that the attorneys have to go through on every single case that requires that they look at, because in Virginia, some other jurisdictions are different, but in Virginia, prosecutors' offices don't have intake units. And so we have a situation where we receive files after they have already been to a magistrate, warrants have been issued, the person has been arraigned, and then we receive it. And before we can make any motion about dismissal or not going forward, we have to get the approval of a judge. And so every single time, my attorneys are supposed to look and see whether the elements of the crime are met. That's one thing that I can tell that on a consistent basis, people who are making these charging decisions are not paying attention to whether the elements of a crime are met. And so protections for everyday members of the community, again, procedures about seeing excessive use of force. If you see excessive use of force on a body cam, you have to raise the alarm. We cannot worry about friendships anymore. If you want to be friends with, law enforcement or anybody else to the degree that you can't raise the alarm when you see a member of the community being surveilled, beaten, or anything like that, you can't work in my office. And so there are, I'm so tired of talking about sensitivity training and bias training. Some of the issues are you cannot train racism out of people. And so we want to call it something cute. We want to call it sensitivity training and bias training. Well, some people are racist and they need to leave the system. They don't need to have power. And so, I can tell you about policies all day long, but the reality is we have to look at the fact that certain people in society get treated one way and get to enjoy an experience in life that's free of government surveillance, free of constant manipulation, constant attack. And then other people who are subjected to this in their neighborhood, subjected to this in school, and subjected to this in every part of their life, and it's oppressive. So let me get off my soapbox. But you know, one of the things to do instead of just talking about policy is to just have this reckoning with things, you know, with the system as we know it, and begin to kill off the things that are so damaging and harmful to our communities.
That was great. Thank you, Stephanie. And so, Mark, I'd like to hear about the public perception of prosecutorial work in your mind, and if you think there are any misunderstandings, but also what Stephanie touched on about accountability and practical steps that prosecutors can and should be taking to get that trust back from the community.
I think that, you know, we are in a place and in a time in our country and in our world where prosecutors are getting a lot of attention. And I think that for decades, history has shown we've built such a reputation that has caused many in the community, some to love us and then others to hate us. And I think that we're at a place now where we can actually do some real change, but it's difficult because not everybody wants to see that change. Stephanie made the comment earlier about the law and order prosecutor. And for those who are not familiar, and I'm hoping everyone that's on this webinar is familiar with that term, and that it is all about, you know, lock them up, lock them up, lock them up, throw away the key. And there are many folks who believe that that's the only job of a prosecutor, that we should be reactive and we should do our best to lock as many people up for as long as we can. Where there are others, and most progressives fall into this thinking, which is that you can't lock your way up out of these problems that we have. You can't just throw away the key on everyone. Everyone does not need to go to prison for the rest of their life. If they are struggling with mental health, they don't need to go to prison. If they are addicted to drugs, they do not need to go to prison. We can go through the data and through the numbers all day, and many of the things that we know are the underlying issues. And so I think that for different people, it's different things. I think we're at a place, again, where we can move forward and begin to really break up some of those fallacies in saying that they just need to be locked up. In my community, I think that's what I've dealt with quite a bit. We have quite a bit of diversity here. When I say diversity, we have a third African American, a third Hispanic, and a third Caucasian folks here, and then sprinkle a little bit of everybody else. And so when you, depending on what third you talk to, there's a difference of opinion on the prosecutor because of the past responses. And so it is extremely important that we as prosecutors take in consideration of the harm as well as the positive that has been done and that by prosecutors' offices and what's been thought about them. But moving forward, I think that one of the difficult things that I find in making those practical steps is oftentimes our collaborative partners, our law enforcement officials, and sometimes our judges, they're traditionalists and they don't want to let go of that old way of thinking. They don't want to let go of giving the longest sentence. They don't want to let go of, you know, arresting as many people as they can versus utilizing their discretion. And so sometimes we find ourselves in a battle that traditionally you as a prosecutor wouldn't find yourself battling with. You know, you usually don't battle with the police, but, you know, oftentimes you're battling with the police and guys, no, we're not sitting in prison for 10 years. That'll go. This is bad. And so, and then that's where you get all of the controversial conversations that then come into place. And then I think politics is what then happens, right? Whose side do you want to be on? Do you want to be on the side of the progressive prosecutor who's looking out for everyone, or do you want to be on the side of the political machine in the union who can scare you on the next election? And so I think those are some of the practical concerns when you're making those practical steps. And I would just throw 3 seconds in here and say that I'm so honored to see that Mark Gonzalez. He has such a great name. Is somehow coming on and off of the screen, and so I look forward to hear what he has to say on this as well.
Hi, Mark. I'm Nicole Parisi. I'm with APA. And I think Vanessa's going to jump in and do a short bio for you, just so the audience knows who they're hearing from.
Hi, I'm so sorry I'm late.
Oh, first of all, do not be sorry. When doing these remote platforms, and it's not the usual thing we have been used to for a while, it's no problem at all. We're just glad to have you here. So for our audience, I will say welcome to Mark Gonzalez. He is the district attorney in, is it Nueces County? I hope I'm not saying that wrong, but it's in Corpus Christi, Texas. He was elected in 2016 and has been implementing some of the innovative strategies and prosecution practices that we all have been discussing. So thank you so much for coming, Mark. Welcome.
Thank you guys for having me.
Hi, Mark. So the next thing I wanted to touch on was diversity. And so, you know, I know Mark, I'm going to have to use last names now, Mark Dupree and Stephanie, you both made history in your elections in becoming, Mark, the first African-American to be elected as a prosecutor in Kansas, and Stephanie, the first elected woman as the Commonwealth attorney in your jurisdiction. And so what do you think the importance is of diversity in not only office leadership, but also office-wide in line prosecutors? And then Mark, I know, you started off the webinar talking about your experience in seeing an African-American judge and how that shaped your view of the criminal justice system. So let's start with Mark Gonzalez. I'd love to hear a little bit from you too of how diversity is important.
Well, I think, we start with diversity from the get just because I'm the elected district attorney. And so that kind of sets the stage for what's to follow. When I immediately took office, I brought along with me my associate, who is a 30-year-old African-American who attended Harvard, which sticks out like a sore thumb in South Texas, if you ask me, and ask everyone. And I purposely chose to do that because I felt that, number one, he was the right man for the job, or person for the job. But number two, it set the stage for things to come. When we chose our management team, we made sure that it was made up of individuals from all walks of life, sexual orientations, you name it. We wanted to have somebody where if we had a situation, we could go to that person and they can be the liaison for that community or that individual population. And so I think it's super important that you make sure that that is something that you implement. And it's just not, okay, who are our applicants? It's super important that you consider that. And even if you don't, you can always educate the individuals that you do have. So we do that every single time we get applicants, and we seek applicants who are diverse.
Thank you, Mark. And so Stephanie, how do you see diversity being important in your office? And do you make any decisions on staffing based on that?
Yeah, so one, at the top, here I am. And I have no apologies about, when I was first running for election in 2014, the conversation came up about diversity. And I was like, this office needs to reflect the makeup of the community, period. And it was not that way. Like Mark Dupree, we have similar stories. I decided I want to be an attorney at 6 when I visited court, saw a Black judge. Immediately, it resonated with me. And, became an intern in the office when I was in law school, became an assistant in the office after being in private practice for a year, and saw what it was like to be under a different administration where there was not diversity. The office did not look like the makeup of the community. And interestingly, the applicants, that I started getting a lot of applications from people who look like me and from people who were from the community and who were like-minded. But also another thing that I saw was I also was getting applications from people who look like me who were traditional prosecutors at heart. And so there's another conversation that has to be had. It's not just diversity. That is a major thing, not just because you want to have an image. You know, it's very clear. We have to get past the image. Yes, we need representation, but we also have to make sure that the people who we bring on are not just, you know, there to make us look good in a picture, but that they actually see the members of the community as people. They see those who are accused as people. So, like, this could be my cousin, this could be my brother, and they're going to treat them as such, that they care about reform, they care about transformation, that we can have conversations about racism, that they are not afraid to call police out. And the reality is that you will have people of all backgrounds and all races who fit into either category. And so while representation is absolutely important, it is a must. Diversity is a must, but I need the right people at the same time. You cannot just, you know, you have to come with the right heart. You have to come with the right mind, because we can try to train, and I can build, you know, an amazing litigator, but I cannot fix your heart if your heart is in the wrong place. And so while I want diversity, I must have it. I need the people who are also going to fight for every member of this community, and who are going to fight to make sure that they raise the alarm when people are being mistreated and things are not going the right way.
That's a really good point, Stephanie. Thank you. And Mark Dupree, would you like to finish up this question?
Well, I'll say that I do not believe that a prosecutor or an attorney of any kind can call themselves legally competent without being culturally competent. And I think that many prosecutors' offices and law firms across the country, I was a public defender, even public defenders' offices sometimes lack in cultural competence. Diversity is so important, right? Not just in ethnicity, but in your thinking. So when I came into office, there was only one African American at any given time as an attorney in this office for the last 3 decades. And the thought process was that there's no minorities out there who are attorneys or who wanted to be prosecutors. It's a flat out lie. Well, one of the problems was it was a tradition in my office up until 2017 when I became DA to pass a noose award around. Whenever there was a hung jury, the deputy DA would go and set a noose award on the table or the desk of the prosecuting attorney. So now let's think about this, folks. Over 5,000 African Americans were lynched and murdered in America, but it was a tradition in this office to pass a noose around, okay? It wasn't that people of color didn't want to be prosecutors. It was the prosecutor's office was not conducive or culturally competent to house anybody that had a different thought process or a different upbringing. And so I think that has to be a major part of what we do, which is changing the culture and changing the traditions in our office that will then open the floodgates to allow other type of people to come into your prosecutor's office, both Black, Hispanic, white, female, Asian, and different type of thought processes who's had different type of experiences with the criminal justice system so that it can help everyone. But we must become culturally competent before we really have a conversation about real diversity.
Thank you, Mark. And before we move on to discussing the progressive practices that you guys have implemented in your offices, I think it would be remiss to not discuss the diverse background that both Marks have in having a defense background. So can you talk a little bit about that, and what are some of the things you found surprising or illuminating in making your transition from defense to prosecution? I know Mark Gonzalez, you famously talked about this during your election, so if you could start us off.
I tell a lot of people that I'm a defense attorney that got elected to be the district attorney. And with that, I brought, I would say, a lot of knowledge. I wouldn't say a wealth of knowledge, but a lot of knowledge regarding, the defense attorney's perspectives and what I thought was right, what I thought was fair, what I thought was some things that needed to be changed. And surprisingly, though, for me, when I used to be a defense attorney, and I know all your listeners out there who share this, it was me and my guy versus everyone, right? Me and my guy versus the man versus the DA's office versus the officers. And when I became the district attorney, surprisingly, one of the most surprising things to me were the days that I had to speak with victims. That was something I never considered when I was a defense attorney. I never thought about that. And as a district attorney, you know, I know that's going to be a hard day when I have to go into the office and explain to a victim of a case, hey, this is why we're doing what we're doing. You know, because most victims, you have to educate them as to what the outcomes are, what the range of punishments are. And some of them, I mean, you can steal a lawnmower and some of them want 10 years in prison, you know, and I'm like, look, that's not what's going to happen. And so a lot of it's educating them. But on some of the worst days is whenever, you know, you have someone who lost a loved one, and those days are the hardest. So that's been one of the most surprising things as an elected district attorney. And I'm sure every prosecutor out there shares that same sentiment, is when you speak to a victim. So I can say it's probably changed me a little bit, and it's been surprising for me to do so. And one of the things, though, as the DA, though, another surprise that I found from my counterparts now, you know, now that I'm the district attorney and I'm dealing with defense attorneys who, you know, not only were my colleagues, but are my friends, you know, sometimes we try to be as, I guess, accommodating as possible. And then sometimes it just isn't enough, but we try to do it as much as possible on a daily basis to make sure that, hey, you know, we're being upfront, transparent, and efficient. So those are the two surprising things that I've kind of found, at least being the district attorney coming from the other side.
Thank you, Mark. And Mark Dupree.
So coming from a defense background and you know, as a public defender, as well as having practiced as a private defense lawyer, for me, the number one thing is figuring out how important it is to keep in mind how my decisions will affect not just the victim, but also the defendant, and keeping in mind how to be fair and just with whatever I'm bringing to the table, not trying to always overcharge to do the whole old school, you charge high and then you plead them down low, but to be fair. And so that defense mindset really has assisted me in the training of my line ADAs in getting rid of that old school thought process and just being fair. And then and trying not to make victims out of defendants, right? And so, you know, people do the crime, then, you know, they gotta do the time. It is what it is. And most folks understand that. Most defense lawyers understand that. But most times they just want a fair shake. You know, if they did a crime for that's 10 years, give them 10 years. Don't try to get them for 20. And so that's the main thing that I really brought over with me from the defense side. But surprisingly, and I'll ditto what Mark said, you know, sometimes, you know, you just can't please some defense lawyers. I mean, you want the house, and I can only give you a room. And so when that happens, you know, a fight ensues, and usually I'm going to win. And so, I mean, I love what we love, but it's still what it is. I got a job to do, and we got to look out for everybody. I'm going to give you a fair shake, but, you know, be wise when you come at me. So.
Thank you, Mark. And I mistakenly left Stephanie out of this discussion. So please, Stephanie, I am so sorry.
My year counts. Don't do that to me.
I'm sorry.
And now I'll make my response quick. But I saw a comment from, I think it was Matthew Frawley, who said, talked about representing the community. And if the accused is from the community, isn't it still the responsibility to seek justice? And that's something that really resonates with me, you know, having a background, not just having been a prosecutor, but having some other experiences, is that not only do we represent the accused, we represent the entire community, but because of that, I can see the assistance and sometimes the resources and sometimes the support that our defense community, especially our public defenders, need. And that has been like the basis of a relationship of collaboration that my public defender and I have established that has greatly benefited our community. We have come together on multiple occasions, to the surprise and sometimes upset of other members of the judicial and legal community, around marijuana prosecution, around fighting against bail hearings being made virtually, and that this is pre-COVID-19, but trying to, represent the rights of those who are incarcerated. And then when COVID-19 first started, and we got information in March about what could happen in incarcerated communities, and nobody was talking about it yet. I was able to put the directive in place that my attorneys would join in those motions to have people released with the public defender, instead of just sitting there and saying we don't object or we submit it to the court, but actually joining up with them. And so one thing that I brought to the table was like, look, we don't need to be fighting. We need to join up when we can, to create better results for our entire community. Because again, even though somebody's accused, doesn't mean that this isn't somebody's family member, doesn't mean that taking them out of the community isn't going to harm the community. So that spirit of collaboration, and yes, we fight when we have to, but that spirit of collaboration has been beneficial to our community.
Thank you, Stephanie. And so I'm going to stick with you for this next question, or prompt really, to kind of discuss some of the progressive practices that you initiated in your office. If you could talk a little bit about what the office was like when you got there, the programs that you have initiated, and any challenges that you have faced creating those policies in your office.
Yeah, so when I was an assistant, prior to me being elected, the office just operated the way traditional prosecutors' offices operate. High, conviction rates are celebrated, convictions are counted, large sentences are celebrated. Doesn't matter what kind of case, doesn't matter the circumstances. I saw racial injustice. Interestingly, the relationship with the police department, a lot of people think the relationship with the police department is strained because of me. The relationship with the police department at that time was strained. And so it was a really, it was not a good environment, in my opinion, for somebody who's trying to do good in the community. If you were interested in change, it was very much the traditional setting. Again, there was not diversity. I believe I was one of maybe 3 or 4 African-American prosecutors in the office. The majority of the office was white. There was majority staff was white. It was just what you think of when you think of a traditional prosecutor's office. And so immediately, I'll never forget when I was running for office, I started talking about I wanted to have programming for youth, consistent programming where they would be brought into the office and where we would go into the schools. And I also wanted to have programs for restoration of rights and working with those who were formerly incarcerated and convicted of felonies. And I got called a social worker. Again, there was no quote unquote progressive prosecutor movement. I think it was one of my opponents was saying, do you want to be a social worker or do you want to be a prosecutor? And I was like, call it whatever you want, because really the problems that we have in society are going to require a different approach. And so within about a month of taking office, we had the Future Leaders Initiative, which now we've had over 200 interns, shadows, and fellows who we call junior Commonwealth attorneys who have matriculated through the office. We have a program called Social Media by the Statutes, where we go into the public schools consistently and teach them about how the law intersects with certain behaviors, especially around behaviors online, to try to, stop the school to prison pipeline, talk to young people about the things that can get in their way. Control Alt Delete is the program where we have seminars in the community and in prisons. We've been doing that since 2015 as well. Started going into the state prisons in 2016. That has grown to where, I realize the importance of ceding power and ceding conversation to those who have been incarcerated who don't have a voice. Have put policies in place to not prosecute marijuana, which now the Commonwealth of Virginia has decriminalized marijuana. After that, have put changes in place around trespasses and other crimes that are nonviolent, about how to address those in court, how to try to approach, non-incarceration for those nonviolent crimes. Have made policy changes around cash bail. But the problem is that as the elected Commonwealth's attorney, I also have to acknowledge when we don't have the discretion to end it. And so some Commonwealth attorneys in my state and around the nation will say, oh, I've ended cash bail in my office. Okay, well, if the court can still engage in that without you, cash bail is not ended. So say what you've done in terms of trying to help with the process, but don't give a false sense of security to the community that something has happened when you don't have full control. Recently, since COVID-19 has hit, I have a small office, but we have started a conviction integrity initiative where we are, now trying to take on something new as a new initiative that we thought we did. We're like, we don't have the budget. And we're like, you know what? We don't have a budget for anything else. None of these other programs that we do, we all do them because we have attorneys who care and staff and victim witness who participate, go out into the community, and they don't, we don't have a budget for it. So we've started that process, and we're also discussing how to implement an excessive use of force review initiative as well. So a lot of what we do has to be done by way of initiative because we don't have the budget, but I don't care. As long as I have the right people, we will continue to come up with new initiatives. We will continue with initiatives we have to serve the community and not just prosecute.
Thank you, Stephanie. And so on that, did you have challenges implementing these programs or initiatives? I'm sorry, or are you facing any now? Any pushback from the judges? Police officers?
Well, I will say, when it comes to the initiatives, that's the beauty of and the ugliness of having an executive office holder, because we get to make these decisions. And so if you have an executive office holder who is willing to jump out and do these things, then you get great results. But then if you have someone who doesn't want to do anything, there's nothing you can do to make them. And so there was no pushback on the Future Leaders Initiative. There was no, and somebody just asked, do panelists have thoughts on prison reform and reentry? That's what the Control Alt Delete program is about. It's about reentry. It's about, giving a voice to those who are incarcerated and who traditionally don't have a say in how reentry works and prison reform, or speaking out about the problems that they face and how prison is not safe. It's not a place for rehabilitation. It's not a place for recovery. It is a very dangerous place where people die. And so there has not been, the only thing that there was pushback on, from what I can recall, is the marijuana. And, again, like, who is that pushback coming from? It's coming from the people who want to keep the status quo. And, I have a responsibility to the community, but I have a responsibility to do what I think is best also, and to decrease, again, that footprint of the criminal legal system on people's lives. We're not supposed to be all up in people's lives like this. And, that we need to shrink our footprint in people's lives. We should not be there. And so, no, there has not. I was able to put these programs in place, do them, and they were embraced, by the community. But there was some friction with that marijuana, but then the legislature came behind, and I would like to think that myself, my public defender, and the work that we did, hopefully that played into that decision by the legislature in some way to decarcerate for our state.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. Let's go to Mark Dupree to talk about some of the progressive practices and initiatives in your office, and any challenges you faced implementing those, or are facing them now while you are trying to practice those initiatives.
So I won't belabor the point. I mean, I think many of the things that Stephanie has done, most of us have attempted to do, and concerning reentry programs, a BOLD initiative, which is my mentoring with high school and middle school students, having them shadow and so forth. I'll jump to the pushback. The pushback that I received was absolutely great. I don't want to make it small. It was, and it is still great. The Conviction Integrity Unit in my office has been going for a solid 2 years now, and we had an exoneree of 23 years in prison, having been there for 23 years for a double homicide he didn't commit. And I'll take that one applause. Thanks, Mark. And it was a pain, because it involved a detective who had retired from one of our biggest agencies in our county, and who still has the biggest union in our county. And many of the folks who were involved were still on the bench. And his partner was the chief of police. And so, me even looking at that case, I call it fire and brimstone, biblically speaking. And so ultimately, we dismissed the case. He was released, and the Kansas Attorney General awarded him a certificate of innocence, and he recently won $1 million because he didn't commit the crime. And so that really thrusted our conviction integrity unit into doing something, but it also put a firm, solid wedge between the status quo of the police unions and of those good old boys who are on the bench and who were ticked off that of those ones who were here 20 years ago. And many of our judges and many of our police officers were at one point, line officers and or assistant district attorneys at that time. And so they took it personal that these changes would say that we made any mistake in the past because you are directly calling them out. And so I have had to deal with quite a few pushback from the Fraternal Order of Police here, pushback from rogue judges is what I would call them, as well as different officers. And, ultimately, at the end of the day, my focus has always been on doing what's right. Many of these folks, before I became a lawyer, I didn't know. And then even as a criminal defense lawyer, I sure in the heck didn't get invited to their little private parties anyway. And so I don't understand why I'm expected to change now that I hold a little position and some power. You want me to bend to your will. No, we're going to do what is right and what is just. And if they don't like it, then it's time for them to retire. So the pushback is real. And one of the things that I tell the community members here, and that's where I focus, I continue to engage this community, and the community engage their voice, and they hold these elected officials accountable, from the commissioners to the judges, because in Kansas and Wyandotte County, they're elected judges. And so they hold people accountable, but many of the injustices that have occurred here are done in secret. Nobody knew, nobody knows about these things. And so it's my business to really make sure that the community is aware of what's happening, of what changes we're making, how it benefits the people, but how the people need to hold these folks accountable, or else they'll try to shut it down once I put it into play. And so that community engagement is extremely important. And I'll tell the defense lawyer, it's extremely important that defense lawyers get some doggone backbone and speak up when they see these injustices happening, not just when it's concerning your client, but when it's concerning the system. Now, here in Wyandotte County, we don't have a public defender's office. So I literally have about 10 or 15 appointed public defenders or private attorneys who are appointed by these old school judges who they don't want to tick off because they don't want to get pushed off the list for getting a little bit of money down the road. And so they are literally allowing their clients to get screwed because they don't want to tick off the person who's putting them on the list. So if truth be truth, right, this is where I get in trouble because I talk truth. The fact is, people need to start standing up and stop chasing a few dollars and stand up for what's right for all people in the system, including their clients and beyond, whether they got a public defender's office or not. Because we as prosecutors, we can't play both roles. We can't be the defense lawyer and the prosecutor. We need folks to stand up and fight with us so that we can make this justice system work all together, rather than being concerned on if they're going to get a new freaking case. Forget that crap. We need to stay focused on what is right.
Thank you. Very well said, Mark. And so on to Mark Gonzalez. If you could talk a little bit about the progressive practices and initiatives in your office, and also the challenges or pushbacks you feel with those.
Well, that's a very hard act to follow. I mean, Mark was preaching down there, and I gave him a few hand claps. But I am super proud to have these colleagues on this panel. I look to their programs, and every DA and anyone listening is, why shouldn't we do these things, right? And so before I took office, It was hard to even get anything on a DWI, driving while intoxicated, that wouldn't be on your record. You're going to trial every single week on DWIs because you couldn't get a deal. And so one of the things we did immediately was take that back. And, we started offering so many pretrial diversions that my misdemeanor prosecutors haven't had trials in such a long time. And so we're having these prosecutors who have been in my office for quite some time without trial experience, but that's okay. So they're starting to get it more in the felony, courts once they move up. So that's been one of the things that we implemented, but it's kind of been counterproductive. But it's still worth it in my eyes. One of the programs that I'm super proud of that we've done, there was an overcrowding in the jail. And almost 80% of individuals who were arrested, every day is for possession of marijuana, criminal trespass, so many cases that are minor infractions but actually go to jail. And so our jail has been overcrowded for quite some time. Every day we're looking at a jail list to see who we can get out, who we can dismiss, or who we can no bail, so that way we can clear the jail. And so one of the programs we came up with was a cite and release program. And so what does that mean? That means officers out in the field, Texas passed something a long time ago where it allows officers to use discretion not to arrest on 7 crimes. And they're all misdemeanor crimes: possession of marijuana, A and B, theft, A and B, criminal trespass, criminal mischief, and controlled substance in a jail facility, which is weird. They're already in jail. But either way, so I said, why don't we do this? If people aren't going to jail, that means that the county doesn't have to pay for their medical, right? If someone's sick and you go to jail, we have to treat them. If someone is in jail and they get beat up, then they can get sued by the county. If somebody doesn't go to jail, then guess what? They get to go pick up their children from school. They don't have to miss their job, and all the collateral consequences that go along with getting arrested, even for one night. And so law enforcement was very receptive to this, to my surprise. Even ISDs, the schools, they were super on board from the get-go, because they wanted, to be sure that they can give someone a citation instead of hauling them into juvenile or whatever. And then that's when the biggest fights would occur in the cafeteria whenever they left for some time. And so, we've saved the county in 1 year almost $1.2 million. And we've saved business owners from losing their, that one employee that comes in. And we've saved parents, from getting in jail and being able to go pick up their children. And so, there wasn't a lot of pushback. One of the most surprising things that I found is the DA. And even before I became the DA, I was in office and realized the power the DA has. And the first week that I'm there, I looked at my first assistant. I'm like, you know what we can do? And you know what we don't have to do? And it was so surprising to me that if we want to, not prosecute minor offenses anymore, we don't have to. And so the cite and release program is a real way to help the community out, but you can also sell it to your counterparts, right? The county commissioner who is wasting so much money on the budget for the jail, for all the other parts throughout the community and the county. So that's one of the things that we've done from the get-go, as opposed to just starting to open a lot of the pretrial diversions and other specialty courts up to individuals who are accused of crimes that never would have had access to it, whether it was veterans court, divert court, mental health court, or anything in between. And if those individuals still don't qualify for those types of courts, then we always have the availability to say, you know what, we're going to make an agreement with you with our office, and you don't even have to enter those courts, and let's see if we can get you on the right track.
Do you want to touch on any pushback or challenges you face? And this can open up to everyone. I think there may be those in the audience right now who are facing that pushback, who may be nervous to implement these initiatives because of that pushback. And so, Mark, I know you said it perfectly of doing the right thing, but are there practical pieces or steps that someone could take or that you have taken to really combat that pushback? And, Mark, I really like what you said about engagement of the community, because I think that's really important. So I don't know if we can start with you on that to talk about how you did that practically.
Sure. So what I did is, as I stated earlier, I created the Community Liaison Board. And that Community Liaison Board is a group of individuals from all geographical locations in our community that I bring to the table with me on a quarterly basis. And I sit down and speak with them about the different policies, the different ideas, the different things that we are doing and how we're doing it. We also created an interfaith liaison board, which brings together clergy of all denominations and religions. And then lastly, a retired and former law enforcement board. What I found is that many law enforcement folks are willing to talk to you more openly when they are not concerned about if the FOP is going to cover their bill if they, have a charge coming. And so many of these retired and former law enforcement folks are willing to talk more openly. And so what I did is really set that up in a way so that people can come and talk to me about stuff that I'm missing or I'm not seeing, and vice versa. And then I'm able to inform them on some of the things that I think may be great ideas, and they can, quite frankly, shut me down and tell me, listen, that's crazy. I understand your thought, but it won't work. But ultimately, I get buy-in from a broad spectrum of the community. And many of these folks are leaders in the community. They lead organizations, they lead churches, they lead neighborhoods, they're educators. And so when we have that consensus of what's happening, then they usually go and spread the word. And many of them are leaders of activist groups within the community. And so one of the things that we're doing right now is expanding our conviction integrity unit into a community integrity unit, which will receive all police misconduct complaints from the community. Right now, all community complaints of police misconduct, racial profiling, anything, excessive force, it all goes to the internal affairs of the agency. Well, if you're talking about appearance of impropriety, right? If you're looking at home cooking, they're going to investigate themselves concerning a complaint that a community member has. And so this community integrity unit then allows my certified law enforcement officers to receive those complaints from the community, both English and bilingual, as well as via email. And then we investigate those complaints, and then we're able to report to the community, right? As we're talking about George Floyd and transparency and really bringing clarity to community and law enforcement actions, it says, look, the investigation was done by an outside agency. It was substantiated or not substantiated. So one, it does that for the community, but two, for the law enforcement officer, it brings safeguards and it gives credence to show that when they didn't do anything wrong, hey, it didn't happen. Nothing happened there, and it wasn't home cooking, and an independent agency said it. And so these are things that community members, I haven't even presented it out to the board or to the commission for all the funding, and it's gone crazy in my county. The activist groups are running with it. It's all over social media. They're demanding funding for Dupree's Community Integrity Unit. And so these are things that people are running with, which is beautiful, right? I got to go back to the Bible. And so if they're preparing the way for me to present it to the commission for my funds, it's a beautiful thing because it puts them at a position of, if we say no to what is right, then they have to deal with the community. And so that's been the way that I've dealt with it, and I've pushed it, and it's been a struggle because not every time the community is on board. And sometimes the community doesn't understand, but still letting them know what's happening, I think has been a major part with me and give me a great amount of peace when I'm having to fight so much of the good old boy tradition.
Thank you, Mark. Stephanie and Mark Gonzalez, do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, mine isn't as polished as Mark Dupree. Mine is, I don't care. I am not here to be friends. I'm here to be respected. And as long as I can have mutual respect with whoever the disagreeing party is, whether it's, law enforcement, whoever it is, if I'm out here fighting for the needs of my community and to correct these injustices that have been perpetuated for so long and to stop them from continuing to happen, if you have a problem with it, you can respect it, but I don't need to be friends. And so that's been the thing that has led me this entire time is I don't worry about friendships. I'm not going to be an apologist for anything that I do. And I don't have to constantly explain myself. And that's I'm trying to also embolden my prosecutors that when you are fighting on this path to do things right, to seek justice and not convictions. You know, when you are paying attention to the needs of the community, when you're paying attention to the needs of both the victim and the accused, when you're trying to treat everybody with the respect that they deserve and trying to put people in a position where they will not only survive at the end of this, but they can turn around and thrive. We don't have time for you know, worrying about friendships and who likes us. We just have to press forward and do what we do and demand the respect that we're owed and continue to respect everybody else along the way. So I love Mark's conviction. What did you call it? Community integrity or I have to get the name of it from you, because I'm going to follow your lead on that. That's amazing. But yeah, Mark Dupree and Mark Gonzalez are laughing because they know me very well. And I mean what I say when I say I do not care.
And Mark Gonzalez, before we go to you, we did get a question in from Mark Dupree about how many community members are a part of that program.
So each one of those liaison boards, and it's the community liaison board, they have about 15 to 20 on each board. And so when I started it out, I had up to 35 individuals, but it trickles down, and each of them serve a 18-month term. And I open it up for the entire community. And after 18 months, we kind of rotate it. With the interfaith liaison board, it's about 15 pastors or clergy or whatever. And so, yep.
Okay, Mark Gonzalez, please. Same question that Stephanie and Mark have answered so well. No pressure.
So I'm from the school of Stephanie. You know, you have to lead without fear. You know, and that's just the way it has to be. You know, I always tell them, you know, you either get down or lay down. That's the only options that they have when you have to do what's right. You know, and if you're going to do something and get criticized, all of us are elected, right? And right now I'm up for election in November. And one of the things that someone said is, or my opponent says, you know, 1,300 dismissals since January. And, you know, and for me, I don't care. You know, we're in a midst of a pandemic. I'm trying to get as many people out of jail. And if that's the criticism I'm going to get, so be it. And so you have to lead without fear. And you also have to realize that you may represent an entire community, but there's division within those communities. You have individuals that are part of that community that think people of color should be locked up, that think anybody that gets caught with a joint of marijuana should go to prison. And these are individuals that are in your community, and sometimes they're the loudest audience out there yelling that what you're doing isn't right and isn't wrong, and they can be your biggest critics. And you have to just shake it off and continue to march forward. You know, the movement and the what's going on right now, you know, it's a powerful one, and it's something that I'm blessed to be a part of. I know Mark is, and Stephanie, you know, the responsibility that we have, but I always think of a song, Rage Against the Machine. No matter how hard they try, they can't stop us now. And that's what's going to happen. And at least I know in my county. And so you have to lead without fear, and you have to be bold, because now is the time. And so whether you're going to get criticized for doing what's right, so be it.
Thank you, Mark. And so one of the audience asked, and goes to the point of buy-in, and I think I'm going to start with you, Stephanie, because you touched on this a little before. How do you get buy-in from your line level DAs or the rest of the attorneys in your office? I know that as an organization, APA is tackling this issue, especially with some of the larger jurisdictions where the DA has great initiatives and reform, but if the line prosecutors aren't on board or don't understand it, you know, maybe not intentionally, then you're not going to see that trickle down into the actual practice. So I know you talked about actually finding the right people from the get-go. So can you discuss that a little bit more?
Oh man, if you're not with it, you cannot work for me. That's it. Like, it's not an option. And, you know, it has been a situation where I've had articles in the past about turnover, and I've gotten all kinds of interesting articles as a Black woman who's elected that predecessors and other counterparts have not gotten, because all offices have turnover. But I don't care how many I get. I will continue to push until I get the people who I need. Right now, I have an amazing group. You know, I never thought I would have a group where everybody in my, you know, on my team, not just the attorneys, but the support staff, the administrative professionals, the victim witness, all of them have something specific that they all bring to the table in this conversation around transformation. They all have different ideas. And the most special thing is they all have the right hearts. They all care. They're all at different levels of their career in terms of their litigation experiences and abilities. But the common thread is that they all want to get it right at the point where we interview. So another thing I have, the beauty of having a smaller office is I interview there's no person that comes in my office that I haven't interviewed. Support staff, victim witness, attorneys. I interview every single person. I ask them very specific questions. I tell them about the initiatives. I tell them about the requirements that they are, assigned to civic leagues in the community. And I ask them specifically, will you, not only participate in these initiatives, but engage in these initiatives consistently? Will you do, how do you feel? And of course, everybody's like, oh yeah, it's great. I want to do it because they want to get a job. But the thing is, you can't hide. When we consistently do these things and have been doing them for the past 5+ years, you can't hide from it. And so really, it's just like a matter of whether you want to have a job or not. And if you do want to keep that job, don't come here and pretend to be something that you're not, because you will not last. So it's a requirement. It's not just something that's optional for those who are interested. Every single person in the office has to participate with these initiatives and work towards the goals of trying to transform this system and have it operate the way that it's supposed to actually do justice and not hold certain people accountable, disenfranchise and abuse members of the community where I was born and raised. It cannot happen.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I know we are close to running out of time, and I have one more question to ask. But before we move on, Mark, do you have anything to add to that? All right. So the last question, so this progressive movement, where do you really see it going at this point? As of now, it's really focused on nonviolent offenders. Do you see that expanding to potentially violent offenders or unsavory crimes?
So, we've all taken trips, and I can tell you, as being the district attorney, I've learned so much, whether it was about, going to Selma, learning about how our country was rooted in hate. And those are things that I didn't learn in high school. I'm from South Texas. Most of our population is mostly all Hispanic and Anglo in my community. It's very few African Americans. And so, it's been eye-opening for me as the district attorney. But if you can learn hate, you can unlearn hate. If you learned to hurt somebody, you can unlearn to hurt somebody. And I think that type of mindset is something that we have to go into, especially when we have the authority, the responsibility to implement the punishments that we have to implement. And so I think that's going to be my short and sweet answer. And I apologize for being late. But, people change. I could tell you I've changed as a person from when I was a defense attorney to being the district attorney. And I anticipate continuing to grow and change. And I think everybody who makes mistakes has that same capability.
Thank you, Mark.
I'll just add, I know we're about to end, but I'll add quickly that I think we can't have a conversation about how we treat nonviolent, people accused of nonviolent crimes versus those accused of violent crimes without having a conversation about the conditions of society that people live in, that play a role in basically how you respond to situations. And, until we start addressing all the issues that we face from, again, food insecurity, lack of, appropriate education, and a lack of opportunity, lack of intergenerational wealth, all these things that create problems and put people in situations where they don't know, lack of medical care, mental health diagnoses and things that put people in positions where they are in a different world than we are, and they are not responding in the way society expects them to respond. Until we correct those problems, we're going to continue to have the issues that we face. And so I think we have to not just look at it from the punitive approach or from the responsive approach, but try to take that proactive approach as prosecutors working as public servants to actually reach back into the communities and pull in other agencies and provide people with resources at the outset to stop these things from even happening. And we can do that. And the realization that we can do that to some will be repulsive because it takes away jobs, it takes away funding. But again, we have to release the footprint of the criminal legal system on our communities, because this is not the function that we should be having.
Thank you, Stephanie. Mark, did you want to add anything?
Well, I was going to say that it's extremely important that you have that holistic view, but also, folks, it's important that we all understand that in this work, we are not alone. You are not by yourself. And when you're trying to make the right changes for the right reasons, there are others that are out there. The reason why we know Stephanie and we know Mark is because we find each other. And it's sometimes a very difficult job. And when you're constantly being attacked for doing what's right, that's right, I take it. We got to find that support and that love. And so, it's not a game. When you're trying to do right, whether you're spiritual or not, there are going to be those who oppose you and who personally, physically, and in otherwise politically attack you. But you still have to keep fighting and find those, align yourself with those who have the same mindset. So don't give up. Don't stop fighting. Be an advocate for justice and keep on pushing through. And hopefully, prayerfully, my children, your children can years from now and say that my parents and you made a difference for someone in the future. So be encouraged, and thank you guys for putting this on and bringing everyone together. So be blessed.
Thank you, Mark. I know a 90-minute webinar can sound daunting, but this has gone by so fast because your insight and experience on this topic, I could hear you guys talk for another couple hours. So thank you so much, and keep doing the great work that you're doing. And hopefully we can come back together again and talk about even more of the great work that you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would like to say thank you to all of the panelists on behalf of NACL and APA, Stephanie, Mark Dupree, Mark Gonzalez, and a special thank you to Nikki Parisi from APA, who did just an incredible job moving our discussion along, including getting the audience questions in. So thank you for that, Nikki. And I will go ahead and speak on behalf of our viewers and say we are lucky to have all of you here with us today and have such an important and dynamic discussion. Let me tell you that nothing of your passion was lost through the remote presentation. We really appreciate that, and we're happy to have you. And as Nikki said, we look forward to talking to you all more in the future because, like Nikki, the rest of us could probably stay here and discuss more with you all day. So thank you so much on behalf of all of our organizations. And I am just also going to say a reminder that we are having a Defender panel coming up at 3 o'clock. If people aren't registered, they can go to the website and do it and get the link to watch. And that is going to be about, progressive prosecutors, the opportunities and challenges defenders have in that situation. So we'll start again at 3. But again, thank you all so much, and we look forward to hearing from you and working with you in the future.